Okay, so I can go first, definitely. I honestly I like being first, so I can get it done. Now, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Amy and other organizers for inviting me to be part of this symposium. I really I think it's an absolutely important topic for doctoral students as well as for junior faculty, and I'm really glad to be part of this discussion and share some of my thoughts on this very important topic. So it's also actually a very good opportunity for myself to really reflect on what is a scholarly identity and how I develop my own identity over time. So I know the organizers uh, asked us to think about a couple questions. I of course I try my best to address those questions, but but basically, I have 4 papers published. I know Amy mentioned there's one paper that's 2016 AMJ article. That's one of my 3 dissertation chapters. But in fact, I have 4 papers published out of my dissertation, and the first 3 papers all won Responsible Research Award from either RRBM or AOM. So if you get a chance to read these 4 papers, you'll notice that all of the 4 papers actually take a very consistent theoretical perspective, that is institutional logics perspective, and study how cross-national variations in institutional configurations shape microfinance organizations' acquisition of resources and their performance in terms of alleviating poverty, serving women, and maintaining financial sustainability. So since today's topic is about finding your scholarly identity, so instead of getting into these papers in detail, I decided to put my org theorist hat on and walk you through a few key thoughts regarding what are the most important factors that may affect your identity, that may shape your identity. All right. So now, if you have taken a doctoral seminar in org theory, you know that organizational identity is a big concept, right? So there are multiple different perspectives regarding identity, and among this, 2 approaches actually stand out. One approach here is what we call the attribute-based approach, right? So here, organizational identity is defined as a claim-making process that centers on the central, distinctive, and enduring characteristics, right? So another approach is what we call the institutional approach. So according to this approach, organizational identity is defined and enabled by the legitimate identity elements derived from the institutional structures and environments surrounding the organization, right? So these are the 2 definitions of organizational identity, but I think they are very useful, in fact, for helping us think about what shapes our own identities as scholars, right? Now, the attribute-based approach helps us think about who we are and what we do, right? So in other words, as a scholar, we need to find our true underlying character, right? So and really identify and develop our own central, distinctive, and enduring attributes as an individual, right? So first, in terms of our central attribute, our own values, beliefs, our educational and industry experiences, as well as our family and other backgrounds, all help define our central attributes. Right? For instance, if you might be highly motivated to help alleviate poverty, for instance, right? So, or you may be very much motivated to help address gender inequality issues because you have very strong values and beliefs to solve important social problems, right? So, alternatively, you might be part of a family business, right? So part of family that runs a very successful or not so successful family businesses. So in this case, this gives you opportunities to observe how a family business functions, as well as what kind of challenges family businesses normally face, right? So in this case, questions related to family business might be dear to your heart, right? So it might become really, really interesting and important for you. So second, I think, think about what is your most distinctive attribute, right? So you might have built expert knowledge on a certain theory and find the theory particularly powerful and resonating as a lens to see the world, right? So alternatively, you may have equipped yourself with some expert knowledge on certain methods, for instance, right? So all of this can become your unique strength you can articulate and develop as part of your identity. And third, in order to make a certain identity attribute enduring and sustainable, you need to make sure you're genuinely interested and passionate about it, right? So like what Amy mentioned from the very beginning, right? So you really need to commit to developing that attribute persistently, right? So we usually say like 3 papers make a stream, right? So what that means is that you need to dedicate a sustainable effort to a certain topic in order to build a research stream around it and be recognized as such when you publish a series of papers on the same topic, right? Um, so this is what we call the attribute-based approach and the implications for our own, individual identity as a scholar, right? So the second approach, like I mentioned, is what we call the institutional approach, right? So this approach draws our attention to the broader institutional context we're embedded in, which also shapes our identity very strongly, right? So according to this approach, your institutional and categorical membership defines who you are, right? So people tend to make sense of who you are and what you do based on where you come from, which university, department, and program you're part of. When you introduce yourself or are introduced by others, normally people will mention who your advisor is, right? So similarly, a lot of times, like people tend to infer who you are based on your committee members, right? So people also tend to understand your identity based on your co-author networks, right? So a lot of times, like when people look at your CV, for instance, they will say, "Oh, you work with so and so, and she is a great scholar in institutional theory. So do you study institutional theory as well?" Right? So normally you face these kind of questions when you attend conferences like Academy. If you have a very broad network of co-authors who are known for very different types of research, people might be confused who you are, right? So in the worst case scenario, people may think you're just being opportunistic by sitting on many different types of papers, simply for getting more publications without a clear idea what type of scholar you would like to be, right? So finally, the professional communities you're part of also define who you are and affect what group of scholars you socialize with, right? So in this case, it'll be very helpful if you could figure out what your home division is at Academy. For example, in my case, I would consider OMT as my home division, but I constantly talk with scholars from both ENT and strategy divisions, right? So this is what we call the institutional approach, right? So now we have discussed very briefly both the attribute based as well as the institutional approaches to identity. There are a couple other very important implications here I want to highlight. So the first one is you need to be conscious about potential identity mismatch. Um, there are two potential sources of identity mismatch. So the first source is when your research defies institutional or categorical expectations, right? So what I mean by this is, for example, you come out of a strong institutional theory school, for instance, but your research has nothing to do with institutional theory, right? Or another example is you graduated from a department known for social network research, but your research has nothing to do with social networks, right? So in this case, people may wonder, why you did not take advantage of your school's strength, but instead opted for researching something else, right? So they may also question whether you are well trained as a scholar, given that your school and department is not known for research in your chosen area, right? So the second type of mismatch may be due to your chosen research topic versus your advisor's expertise, right? So this is actually a very delicate balance you need to manage. So on the one hand, you want your research to be close enough to your advisor's expertise so that you can really benefit. On the other hand, you do not want to be perceived as always in your advisor's shadow, right? But instead, you really need to try your best to carve out a unique space for yourself to make your name known, right? Um, in addition to this identity mismatch, it is also important to keep in mind that identity is not static, right? But instead it can evolve over time. And your identity is not fixed, right? But it can have a very fluid boundary in the long term, right? So we need to be really conscious of the various factors that may distract you from your original identity, right? So it is okay to expand and elaborate your identity over time, but at the same time, it is equally important to keep your core identity strong and intact, um, so that you still are building on your strengths, even though you're expanding and elaborating on your identity over time, right? So now I think those are my thoughts. Originally I thought about talking about a very specific paper, like Amy suggested, but I thought because every single individual is so different, and every single paper has its own history and legacy, right? So now, instead of talking about specific paper, I think this more like a general principles. I might be more applicable to most of you. So hopefully you'll find the messages here useful. But I would love to talk more during the Q&A. Thank you again for having me here. Thanks.